All right, so I am Crystal Anderson. As mentioned earlier, I'm a wildlife biologist and PhD student here at the Kennedy Center. And today I'm going to talk about the human dimensions of waterfowl management. Traditionally, we have managed through science. However, there is a growing recognition that stakeholders have valuable input that can be used in our management decisions. So we'll go into a little bit of history. Most of you may know it, but prior to the 1700s, we had a vast network of wetlands across coastal South Carolina. Plantation owners saw potential in this. They brought slaves from West Africa because they had a traditional knowledge of cultivating rice. With them came rice trunk technology. This allowed for water regulation within these tidal wetlands. These wetlands then evolved into geometrically shaped fields, replacing the natural landscape, forever changing the hydrology of coastal South Carolina. And we also had a unique culture develop here. The Gullah Geechee was a blend of Sierra Leone and English traditions. They developed their own distinctive Creole language, and they have a cultural impact that still persists today. Their historical use of this land and their current knowledge could potentially benefit our management decisions. Our coastal region had immense productivity and wealth tied to this rice culture. But things began to change. The Civil War began in 1861, plunging the South into poverty and ruin. Slavery was abolished in 1865, which took away that free labor that these plantation owners were abusing for their gain. And then South Carolina was hit with repeated catastrophic hurricanes with many unlisted tropical storms in between. This pushed out the last remnants of rice production in our area. Yeah. So we had basically South Carolina, we were no longer the king of rice. After rice culture ended, these lands were left in that disturbed state. Many of the Gullah remained in the area and continued to work the land. But for most people, these lands were undesirable, right? They were hot, they still are. Lots of humidity, lots of mosquitoes, plenty of alligators, okay? However, we did notice that these wetlands provided opportunities as they began to shift into more of a diverse vegetative state. These areas were prime for waterfowl and waterbird management due to that remaining infrastructure. Rice trunks allowed for us to control water levels, providing preferred feeding and nesting sites for these waterfowl and waterbirds. The seasonal flooding mimicked that natural wetland state. This offered grains, seeds, aquatic invertebrates, as well as lots of other subsistence for these overwintering birds. The flooding schedules created habitat diversity. This enhanced the overall biodiversity of the region. And flooding these rice fields promoted nutrient cycling, which contributed to plant growth. Essentially, rice trunks became a versatile tool in waterfowl management. Their use demonstrates how agricultural practices can be adapted to support biodiversity. And we now have to think about, should we go forward and protect this historical technology? Is it worth preserving? But we're facing some issues, some very serious threats in the near future. Right now, population growth has exploded in coastal South Carolina. Myrtle Beach, for the third year running, is the fastest growing city in the nation. The need for infrastructure to support this growth now poses a threat to the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge if that referendum passes this fall. And there's many other coastal wetlands that are going to be impacted by the amount of growth that is occurring. And we can talk about climate, whether you believe it's man-made or some fluctuation, a natural cycle of the earth. Things are changing. Here, we're looking at the overall year-to-year variability in temperatures here in South Carolina. The overall pattern has continued to increase since the mid-1970s. We also experience drought conditions. We see fluctuations in the precipitation, but as time is going on, especially since the 21st century, we are starting to have much longer, long-term drought conditions and severity. We also experience plenty of hurricanes. We've had 44 since record keeping began. And here in the coastal area where these rice impoundments are at, we are disproportionately impacted. Rainfall and flooding events, a lot of times it's coming in with these storms, but we have seen increased flooding and rain events specifically since Hurricane Matthew in 2016. So while we seem to remain in like this exponential drought period, when we do get rain, it's really severe rain events. And storm surge. Now, Hurricane Hugo still holds the record for the highest storm surge at 20 feet, pushing 10 miles inland. But let's think about how science is telling us that these storms are only going to continue to get worse. If we have storms that could potentially be as significant or worse than Hurricane Hugo, what kind of damage that's going to do to our tidal systems. All of these issues will then be compounded by the rising sea levels. Relative sea level in Charleston has risen 10 inches since 1950, but we have another serious issue at hand. Since 2010, that has now increased to an average of 1 inch every 2 years. This is going to have significant consequence on the way we manage these tidal impoundments for our waterfowl. But my guess is that I'm not telling you anything that you are not currently experiencing firsthand out there in the field. And this is where we're trying to join science and policy with your real world experience. So, human dimensions, that's kind of the direction that a lot of my research is going. Human dimensions allows us to address multiple aspects of waterfowl management. First, we have stakeholder engagement. Waterfowl management involves multiple stakeholders, each with different values, beliefs, and experiences that we should consider in our management decisions. It deals with policy and decision-making. Effective waterfowl management requires policies that are not only scientifically informed and economically viable, but also socially acceptable. It helps with adaptive management. Waterfowl management requires us to respond to changing conditions and new information, things that our stakeholders are already doing, things that you are already doing. And then it's also about respecting cultural and recreational values. We need to know what matters most to our stakeholders and ensure that our waterfowl management incorporates their values into the management decisions. By incorporating the human dimensions into waterfowl management, we are ensuring a holistic approach that integrates ecological, social, and economic factors. This integration is going to be essential for developing those effective, sustainable, and socially acceptable management strategies. So, who are our stakeholders? We have our state and federal wildlife biologists. We have our private landowners. We have our plantation managers. These stakeholders are already adapting to these climate change scenarios, whether they even know it or not. So we want to capture that experience to understand what's working and what is not working so that others can benefit from that. We also have the public. The public has opinions and interests that could create resistance to any management strategy we do if their decisions and thoughts are not given consideration. Remember, it is the public stakeholder that is essentially paying the taxes that then go and fuel the money we need for the programs that we're trying to do. And then again, about that cultural respect for these people that have been farming these lands since the 1700s. The Gullah have a significant historical tie to this area that is being used for waterfowl management. And with their knowledge and experience, we could again benefit in creating our management strategies. So we had 3 objectives. We wanted to evaluate stakeholder knowledge and experience with antebellum rice fields, management, and associated infrastructure. We also wanted to evaluate stakeholder perceptions and attitudes of conservation and restoration of these antebellum rice fields, that associated infrastructure, and the wildlife that are within. And we also wanted to evaluate stakeholder perceptions of antebellum rice fields and the management in future climate change scenarios. Okay, so here we were trying to figure out, like, where do we target? And we took the current existing rice fields and we overlaid that with a Category 2 tidal inundation. The reason I chose Category 2 was I was just trying to get the general area, and that we know out of 44 named storms since 1851, 40 of them were Category 2 or less. So I just kind of used that as a target. We came up with 10 counties. I've got Jasper, Hampton, Beaufort. I'm going to butcher this one. Colleton. Somebody correct me later. Charleston, Dorchester, Berkeley, Georgetown, Horry, and Marion. The design is currently ongoing. We're going to create questions that evaluate the current knowledge and perceptions on management, culture, and climate change to address those objectives. We will have a feedback period where we send this survey out to 5 people that are very experienced with waterfowl management and what's going on, and 5 people that are not, so that we can find the missing gaps and further modify that survey to make sure it's going to get the knowledge we need. That should happen around August. We have to go through a step called IRB approval. That should happen in September, and this is going to ensure that our survey meets these accepted ethical standards. The survey should be active. We're going to be asking a lot of you to take this survey, so just hang on. It's a big one, but the things that you're going to give back to us is extremely important. That should be November to December. The analysis will be January through March, and we'll use Qualtrics because they have an extensive set of analysis tools, as well as whatever else we tend to find will help us analyze this data. Some of the anticipated outcomes: state and private land managers are going to be our target audience with this particular one, and anyone else who's ever worked in these systems. We are going to find that most of their knowledge is probably coming from hands-on in the field experience, a lifetime of experience, okay? But I have a little bit of concern that when we start to pull data and look at the demographic stuff, we're going to see that we have an aging waterfowl management workforce. And I am concerned that we are facing an impending loss of critical knowledge, which is why surveys like this is so important. State and private managers will be focused on conservation and preservation of these impoundments, with a strong emphasis on waterfowl species, okay? But I think the public, the general public, is going to have a stronger preference towards charismatic species such as waterbirds. The gullah are going to have a stronger preference for species that potentially provide food or historical cultural value to them. I think all people are going to believe that the impoundment should be managed, protected, or something at some level, as well as these rice trunks. But state and federal managers are going to want, more tax money to do this. Private landowners may want some sort of subsidy program to be developed, and the public isn't going to want their tax dollars to go to it, but yet they're going to still think it's important to do, right? Some stakeholders will put a lot of value on protecting that historical infrastructure, while others will be more concerned with the ability to just control the water levels, right? So do we continue to try and replace these rice trunks at $120,000, $130,000, $140,000 a piece? Or should we find a different alternative for managing these water levels? And we need to know, what do the people think? What do the stakeholders think, okay? No stakeholder will be okay with the cost of restoring or replacing these historical technologies. It is so cost prohibitive, but there may not be a cheaper solution. All stakeholders will acknowledge that the changes in climate through personal experience or their management, but not all will agree on the source of the change. And managers will offer us very valuable insight into ways they have mitigated ongoing climate change scenarios, which is extremely important for what comes next. We hope to be able to get publications out of this. These publications will help inform other researchers on the human value of waterfowl management, protecting these rice impoundments and these structures. We then hope to use this information to go into a decision support tool, which Toby will talk to you about right after lunch. And that's going to take also into consideration not only the waterfowl side of what Exceed is doing, but also the social dimensions of what I'm doing to try and build this really comprehensive plan going forward. It would be great if we could get some management guides out of this decision support tool. And then workshops can be created to help increase stakeholder knowledge and public support on waterfowl management needs. So I have a few acknowledgements. Of course, the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce is going to be critical, and they have signed up for this to make sure that we can get into those underserved communities. The Sea Grant Consortium is funding a lot of this research. And of course, all of the people that I work for that I love. And that is what I've got for you. Do I have any questions?